The department meeting had been running for 40 minutes when I finally got to my section. I had prepared for 3 days. The project, a client retention strategy for one of our most at-risk accounts, was losing ground, and I had a plan that I genuinely believed would pull it back. I had the slides, the data, the timeline, the projected outcomes. I was 2 minutes into presenting when my boss, Warren, leaned back in his chair and started laughing. Not the polite, uncomfortable kind. The kind that fills a room and pulls everyone else's attention toward it. He held up one hand and said, in the tone of someone managing a confused intern, "Let's not pretend you're running the company." The room went silent. He wasn't finished. "You're lucky to work here. There are 100 people who would replace you tomorrow." 2 colleagues looked at their laptops. One looked at the wall. Warren then redirected the project to his preferred employee, a man named Garrett, who had been at the company for 8 months and had never worked directly on the at-risk account. I closed my laptop quietly. I didn't argue. I didn't flush or stammer. Because in that exact moment, something that had felt like a suspicion for months had just become a certainty. The meeting wrapped up fast after that. People gathered their things and left the room in the particular hurry that happens when everyone wants to be somewhere else. I was the last one out. Before I stood up, I looked at my phone, which had been sitting face up on the table the entire meeting. The voice recorder application was still running. I had started it before the meeting began, not because I had planned for that specific exchange, but because I had been recording department meetings for 2 months. Not secretly or illegally. Our company had a policy that employees could record meetings for personal note-taking purposes, provided they didn't distribute the recordings externally. I had started doing it after the 3rd time a strategy one had proposed in a meeting appeared a week later in a leadership presentation with Warren's name on it. I had been collecting something for a while, not just recordings. Emails, documents, version histories, original drafts. The humiliation from that meeting burned in the way that real humiliation does, sitting somewhere between your throat and your chest. But underneath it was something steadier. Because what Warren had just said on the record in front of 9 witnesses had shifted the nature of what I was holding. It wasn't just documentation anymore. It was proof of a pattern. My name is Rowan Blake. I had joined the company 3 years before that meeting as a mid-level business analyst. The team was small, the systems were chaotic, and the company ran on a constant low-grade panic that passed for urgency. I was good at the work in a way that was hard to describe to people who hadn't seen it, the kind of good where you walk into a broken situation and start seeing the pieces before anyone has fully explained the problem. Within 4 months, I had automated 3 reporting processes that had been done manually since the company's founding. Within 8 months, I had rebuilt the workflow for 2 departments that were consistently missing deadlines. Within a year, I had taken on client-facing work above my grade level, because there was no one else available who understood the system well enough to step in. Warren managed the department. He had been at the company for 9 years, had strong relationships with upper management, and was very skilled at something that had nothing to do with the actual work. He was skilled at being in the room when results were announced. And at the company, being in the room when results were announced was how credit was assigned. It was a system that rewarded presence over production. And I had not yet understood how completely that system shaped everything else. I noticed the pattern the first time about 8 months in. I had floated an idea in a Wednesday team meeting, a way to restructure the client onboarding sequence that I believed would reduce the dropout rate in the first 30 days. Warren had said it was interesting and moved on. 2 weeks later, at an all-hands presentation, he stood in front of the department and described the same restructuring approach as a strategic initiative he had been developing. The language was different. The core idea was identical. I told myself it was coincidence. Then it happened again with a quarterly analysis I had prepared. Then again with a process improvement I had suggested for the sales support team. The version that reached leadership always had Warren's fingerprints on it. The version I had created existed in email threads and drafts that no one above Warren ever saw. I kept my head down because I was building something. The client relationships, the deep system knowledge, the results that kept the department's numbers looking strong, all of it was accumulating. I believed at some point that accumulation would speak for itself. But something was about to happen that made me understand accumulation wasn't enough. You also had to be positioned where people could see it. The clearest moment came 14 months before the meeting where Warren told me I was lucky to work there. A major account, Hartfield Group, one of the 3 clients who represented about 40% of the department's annual revenue, had given formal notice that they were considering ending their contract. The account manager had escalated it to Warren, who came to me the following morning and said 2 words: "Fix it." No brief. No timeline. No resources assigned. Just the expectation that I would absorb the situation and produce a result. I spent 3 weeks doing exactly that. I rebuilt the client relationship strategy from the ground up. I developed a new account management framework that addressed the specific frustrations Hartfield Group had documented. I ran 2 workshops with their internal team. I produced a revised proposal with new service terms and deliverables that met their stated needs. Hartfield Group stayed. Their renewal value increased. The department's numbers for that quarter were the strongest in 2 years. And at the executive review meeting where Warren presented the results, I was not in the room. I was at my desk. And the plan he presented as a leadership achievement was the one I had built, word for word, slide for slide from the ground up. A coworker named Petra came to find me after that executive meeting. She had been at the company for 5 years and knew the internal landscape better than most people. She sat down across from my desk and said quietly, "You understand what he's doing, right?" I told her I understood that he was taking credit. She shook her head. She said it was something more specific than that. She said Warren had been describing the department's success to leadership in a way that consistently centered his own strategic judgment and framed the team, including me, as execution-level resources implementing his vision. She said leadership genuinely believed the department worked the way Warren described it. And then she said the thing that stayed with me longest. She said, "If anything goes badly in this department, you're the one who's going to catch it. Because in every story he's telling them, you're the one who was responsible for the operational details." I sat with that for a long time after she left. She was describing something I had been circling without naming. Warren wasn't just stealing credit. He was building a structure in which the successes flowed upward to him, and the failures had somewhere specific to land. And the place where they would land had my name on it. I started documenting everything systematically the week after Petra's conversation. I kept a personal external drive at home that never touched the company network. Every significant email I sent or received, I forwarded to a personal account. Every project proposal, every original strategy document, every draft, I saved a time-stamped copy with version history intact. I kept a running log that I updated at the end of each workday, describing what I had worked on, what decisions had been made, who had been present, and what the outcomes had been. I also started keeping the original files for every deliverable I produced, in addition to whatever went into the company system. My name was in the metadata of every document I created: creation date, author field, version history. That metadata was not something that could be easily changed retroactively without leaving traces. At the time, the whole process felt like the kind of overcaution you engage in when you're slightly paranoid. But 3 weeks later, Warren made a move that confirmed every instinct behind it. He gave a promotion that should have been mine, by any reasonable measure of contribution or performance, to someone who had been at the company for 6 months. The promotion had been signaled in advance. A senior analyst role had opened in the department, and my direct colleagues had assumed it would go to me with the kind of quiet certainty that develops when you watch someone do senior analyst level work for 2 years without the title or the compensation that should accompany it. I had assumed the same thing, without letting myself think about it too directly or too hopefully. Warren announced the promotion in a team email. The recipient was a woman named Clarissa, who had joined the company 6 months earlier from a different industry. She had solid professional energy and a warm way of engaging with people in meetings. She had never, to my knowledge, produced an original piece of analytical work that moved a client relationship measurably forward. Warren's stated reason, when pressed by a colleague in a follow-up conversation that found its way back to me through Petra, was that Clarissa had better leadership presence. What that phrase meant in practice was that Clarissa agreed with Warren, deferred to Warren consistently, and reflected his ideas back to him with visible enthusiasm. In the department's culture, that particular set of behaviors was the main criterion for advancement. The quality of your output was secondary. 2 months after Clarissa's promotion, the company announced a major strategic initiative. It was a new client success program, a structured framework for proactive account management designed to reduce churn and increase renewal values across the portfolio. I read the announcement email at my desk and felt a very specific and cold recognition settle in my chest. 14 months earlier, I had written a 12-page proposal laying out exactly that framework, in almost exactly those terms, in response to a company survey asking for employee input on strategic improvements. I had submitted it through the official channel. Warren had been copied on the submission. The proposal had never been acknowledged. No reply, no feedback, no mention in any subsequent communication. I went to my personal drive and pulled up my original file. I read through it, then read through the company's new initiative announcement. The framework was not word for word identical. Someone had made language adjustments throughout. But the core structure, the 4-phase approach to client engagement, and the specific metrics proposed for measuring early-stage retention were the same thinking presented in different clothing. Warren was listed as the initiative lead. My name was not in the document at any point. Which brings the story back to where it started. The department meeting, the presentation I had prepared, the project Warren handed to Garrett while telling me in front of the room that I was lucky to have a job. What Warren didn't know, sitting at the head of that table with his 9 witnesses, was something that mattered considerably. The project he had just handed to Garrett was built on a system I had designed and maintained personally for the past 16 months. It was not a simple system. It was a set of interconnected automated processes, report generation, client data syncing, dashboard updates, alert triggers, that I had built from scratch because the previous approach kept producing errors. The system worked because I understood it. I had documented it, but the documentation was technical and dense and had never been walked through with anyone else on the team. I had been the single point of knowledge for how the whole thing operated. When Warren handed that project to Garrett, he handed him the wheel of a vehicle that Garrett had never been inside. And I closed my laptop, and I went back to my desk, and I waited. The project launched the following week. I watched from my desk as the early signs of trouble began appearing in the way that system problems always appear, small and dismissible at first, then multiplying in a pattern that anyone who knew the system would recognize immediately. Reports that should have refreshed automatically weren't updating. Client dashboards were showing data that was 12 hours stale. 2 deadline alerts failed to trigger, which meant Garrett missed a client check-in that had been in the system as a high-priority flag. Warren described these in the team channel as minor technical issues that are being addressed. I said nothing publicly. I kept my documentation log updated and precise. By the end of the first week, 3 client accounts had flagged inconsistencies in their reporting. By the end of the second week, the largest of those accounts, Hartfield Group, the same account I had saved a year and a half earlier, had requested an urgent status call. On that call, the client's director of operations asked a question that Warren was not prepared to answer well. He asked to speak directly with the person who had originally designed the system they were relying on. Warren hesitated on that call in a way that would have been invisible to someone who didn't know him. A slight shift in his delivery, a beat too long before the response. He said he would follow up on the technical side and coordinate the right resources. The client, to his credit, wasn't impatient. He was specific. He said the system had worked reliably for over a year, and the issues that were appearing now had the shape of a configuration problem rather than a technical failure. He said he wanted to speak with whoever had built the configuration. Warren said he would arrange it. He ended the call and did not speak to me. In the team channel, he wrote that he was working to identify the best resource for the client's technical question. There was something almost sad about watching that particular maneuver fail in real time, because after a year and a half of presenting the department's work as his own strategic leadership, he now had to quietly locate the person who actually knew how everything worked without making visible the fact that he hadn't known where that person was the whole time. Garrett messaged me privately that afternoon. He said, "I think this is above what I was told it was going to be." Hartfield Group's director of operations, a careful and experienced man named Frederick, did not wait for Warren to arrange anything. He had my direct email address from the correspondence we had maintained during the account recovery 18 months earlier, the period when I had run the workshops with his team and rebuilt the service framework from scratch. He sent me an email that was professional, brief, and unambiguous. He said the system was experiencing issues that his team believed were related to the configuration layer, and that based on our previous work together, he wanted to ask me directly whether I could explain what was happening and what would resolve it. He said he understood if company protocol required him to route the conversation through department leadership, but that he wanted me to know the question was specifically for me. I read the email 3 times. Then I replied. I was careful and precise. I told him I was happy to provide context, and that I wanted to make sure he had the complete picture of how the system worked. I attached 3 documents: the original system design specification I had written 16 months earlier, the configuration guide I had produced for internal reference, and the project timeline showing the full development history. Every document had my name in the author field and a creation date. Frederick replied within 2 hours. He said the documentation was exactly what his team had needed, and that it made the current issues fully explicable. He also said something in the second paragraph that I read carefully more than once. He said he had not previously understood the full scope of what had been built on his account's behalf over the past 18 months, and that reviewing the original design documentation had been clarifying in ways that extended beyond the current technical problem. He said he was going to request a meeting with the company's upper management to discuss the account's ongoing management structure and the personnel responsible for its key technical components. He copied 2 names on the email: his own VP and the company's chief client officer, a woman named Ingrid, who sat 3 levels above Warren in the company hierarchy and who I had met once at an industry event and never spoken to directly. Ingrid's name appearing in that thread was the first domino in a sequence that began moving faster than I had anticipated. Within 4 hours of Frederick's reply, I had received a meeting request from Ingrid's office. The subject line read, "Project Architecture Discussion, Urgent." Warren was not on the invitation. I did not know exactly what was happening inside the company in the 24 hours after Frederick's email, but I could read the signals. Warren sent me a message in the afternoon that was notably different in tone from any message he had sent me in the previous 3 years. It was careful and collaborative where his usual register was confident and directive. He said he understood there was a client inquiry underway and asked if I could brief him on the technical details before my meeting with Ingrid. I replied that I was happy to connect and suggested a time the following morning, which was after my meeting with Ingrid, though I didn't mention that. He confirmed the time. Meanwhile, Petra sent me a short message. She said the executive floor had been unusually active since mid-afternoon. She said she had seen 2 members of the leadership team in the hallway outside Warren's office in what looked like an unscheduled conversation. She said Clarissa had been in 3 separate closed-door meetings. And she said the project that Warren had taken from me and given to Garrett was now officially flagged as a critical status account in the company's internal tracking system. A project that Warren had described to the client as progressing smoothly 2 weeks earlier. My meeting with Ingrid happened at 9 the following morning. I came in with my documentation folder organized and printed. She started the meeting by saying she wanted to understand the history of the systems being used on several key accounts, and that Frederick's inquiry had raised questions she wanted to address directly. She asked me to walk her through the development of the client management system I had built. I did. I walked her through the full timeline: the original proposal, the design process, the development phases, the testing, the deployment, and the ongoing maintenance I had been performing. I showed her the documents. I showed her the version histories. I showed her the project specifications with my name in the author fields and the dates that predated any other documentation on the subject. Ingrid listened without interrupting for most of the meeting. She asked specific questions at 3 points, all of them precise and framed in a way that told me she was not confused about what the documentation was showing her. She was confirming it. When the meeting ended, she thanked me and said she would be in touch. She shook my hand at the door, which was the kind of detail that tells you the shape of a conversation, even when the explicit content has been deliberately neutral. The internal review began 4 days after my meeting with Ingrid. It was framed officially as a routine project audit, the kind of review the company conducted periodically to assess resource allocation and project quality. But the scope of it, which Petra described to me based on what she was hearing from colleagues, was not routine. The review team was going back through the previous 2 years of the department's project records. They were pulling email chains, comparing document creation timestamps against presentation dates, reviewing client communication logs, and cross-referencing who had been assigned to accounts against who appeared in the original work product. The pattern that was emerging, according to Petra, was not subtle. She said several people on the review team were finding that the department's most significant successful projects had one name consistently attached to the original analytical work. She said that name was mine. She also said something else: that the review team had found a specific set of instances where documents I had created had been represented under different authorship, without any version attribution or acknowledgement. She said the legal team had been asked to review those instances specifically. During the 3rd week of the review, I shared the recording. Not all of the recordings I had accumulated, just the one from the meeting where Warren had told me I was lucky to work there. I shared it in response to a formal request from the review team, who had asked me to provide any documentation relevant to my experience of the department's management practices over the prior year. I submitted it as an audio file with a written transcript attached, the way I had been taught in a compliance course years earlier that audio evidence should be submitted. The response was not immediate, but I heard through Petra what had happened when it was played for the 2 members of senior leadership overseeing the review. Petra said one of them had listened to the section where Warren said, "There are 100 people who would replace you tomorrow," and then asked the review coordinator a question quietly. The question, according to Petra, was, why would a manager say that to someone producing results at this level? That question, asked quietly in a room I was not in, was the point at which the review stopped being administrative and became something closer to disciplinary. The project Warren had taken from me and given to Garrett did not recover. I had known it wouldn't, which was not satisfaction so much as a straightforward recognition of what the system required to function correctly. By the 4th week after the meeting, Hartfield Group had formally placed the account on a review status, which in the company's internal language meant the client was actively evaluating whether to continue the relationship. 2 other accounts that depended on the same system infrastructure, accounts I had been managing the technical side of without formal title or recognition, had also flagged concerns. The department's performance metrics for the quarter were tracking below forecast. Leadership had begun asking questions about the project timelines that Warren had committed to publicly. Warren appeared in fewer meetings. When he did appear, his contributions were shorter, and his usual quality of confident certainty had become something more carefully measured. Petra told me that 2 people who reported to him directly had submitted requests to be transferred to other departments. The structure that had looked stable from the outside, the one where Warren sat at the top and results flowed toward him, was revealing what it had always actually been underneath. A system held up by work that he had not done. Warren called me on a Tuesday evening. My phone showed his name, and I let it ring twice, long enough to decide consciously that I was going to answer. His voice was different from any version of it I had heard in 3 years of working for him. The confidence wasn't gone entirely. It was too practiced to disappear completely, but it had been reorganized around something more careful. He said he was reaching out because the situation with the project had become more complex than expected, and he wanted to discuss how to stabilize it. He said the company valued my technical expertise, and that he personally had always recognized my contribution to the department's success. He said the right move for everyone, himself included, was to get the right people in the right roles going forward. And then he made his offer. If I was willing to step back into the project in an active capacity and help address the current client concerns, he would recommend me for a promotion, the senior analyst role, with a title adjustment and a salary increase. I asked him to send the details in writing. He said he would have something to me by end of week. The written offer arrived on Thursday. It was a formal document, drafted through HR, outlining the promotion terms. Senior analyst title. A 14% salary increase. An expanded scope that included formal ownership of the technical infrastructure I had built and maintained informally for over a year. I read the full document twice. The offer was real. The compensation was meaningful. And buried in the final section, under a heading called Professional Conduct Agreement, was a clause that required me, as a condition of accepting the promotion, to agree to a set of internal communication standards that included a provision against statements that could be characterized as disparaging toward current or former department leadership. It was worded carefully, but the meaning was not subtle. They were offering me the promotion and asking me to agree, as a condition of receiving it, not to discuss what I knew about how the department had been run. They wanted the result of my work without the record of what that work had revealed. I set the document down. I thought about the recording on my phone. I thought about the documentation folder. I thought about Petra's message that morning, which had said only, "Have you made a decision?" I declined the offer. I sent a brief, professional reply through HR, thanking them for the consideration, and stating that the terms as structured weren't a fit for where I was in my career. I did not enumerate my reasons. I did not send the reply in anger. By the time I wrote it, something else had already happened that had changed the weight of the decision considerably. 3 weeks earlier, a competitor, a mid-sized firm called Arrowwood Group that I had known peripherally through industry contacts, had reached out to ask if I would be open to a conversation about a leadership opportunity they were developing. I had taken the call because taking calls was professional practice, not because I had been actively looking. But the role they described was specific and substantial. Head of Client Systems, a division-level position with authority over both the technical architecture and the client success function, reporting directly to the Chief Operating Officer. The salary they mentioned was significantly above what Warren's offer had contained. I had asked for a week to consider. That week aligned almost exactly with the week Warren's offer arrived. I read both documents on the same day. The decision, once I had read them both, was not complicated. I submitted my resignation on a Monday morning. 2 weeks' notice, professional in every respect, with a detailed transition document that I had spent the previous weekend preparing, a thorough guide to the systems I had built, organized to give whoever took them over the best possible chance of maintaining them correctly. I did not do this for Warren. I did it because the clients using those systems deserved continuity, and because the quality of my exit was mine to define regardless of how my time there had been defined by someone else. The reaction in the office that day was faster and more visible than I had expected. By noon, 3 clients had contacted the company asking to confirm whether I was leaving and who would be taking over their accounts. By end of day, Hartfield Group had sent a formal message through Frederick asking for an urgent conversation with senior leadership about account continuity. 2 project timelines that had been marked as on track were reclassified as at risk within 48 hours of my departure announcement. Leadership held an emergency planning meeting that afternoon. I was not invited, but Petra attended and sent me a brief message afterward. It said, "They finally understand the number." The weeks after my departure told the story more clearly than anything I could have arranged deliberately. 4 major accounts formally requested continuity assurances, and 2 of them, including Hartfield Group, chose to follow their work to Arrowwood Group when they learned I had joined there. The revenue impact to my former company was significant enough to appear in their quarterly client report as a line item under Account Transitions. Warren was removed from his position as department head 6 weeks after I left. The official communication described it as a restructuring, which is the language companies use when they want to avoid saying that a leadership failure has become undeniable. Clarissa was moved to a different function. Garrett was reassigned to a junior account role. The senior analyst position that had been used to try to buy my silence was eventually filled by an external hire who, from what I heard through Petra, spent her first month trying to understand the systems I had built from the documentation I had left behind. Petra told me the new hire had said, after the first week, that whoever designed this infrastructure had understood the client relationships at a remarkably deep level. Petra said she had smiled and said nothing. A year after my resignation, my team at Arrowwood Group was running 12 client accounts, 3 of which had come with me from my former company and 2 of which were new relationships we had built from scratch. The work was better, not just in output but in the actual experience of doing it, which I had not fully realized had been degraded until I was somewhere that wasn't. Ingrid, who had left my former company 4 months after I did and joined a board advisory role, sent me a congratulatory message on a product launch. I thanked her, and we exchanged professional notes. I heard from Petra occasionally. She had been promoted and was doing well. One afternoon, she sent me a message she had been holding for a while. She said that in the weeks before Warren was removed, he had made a comment to the remaining team during a strategy meeting. He had said the department's difficulties were temporary and that the team needed to focus on moving forward because, his words, anyone could do what he did. Petra said the room had gone quiet, because everyone in it by that point had spent weeks discovering exactly what it took to do what I had done. They were lucky to have had me, and they knew it now.